Welcome to Table Talk 8.75. No session today, but we should be getting back to Golden River Underground after a few more downtimes. Send us some feedback on Reddit or YouTube, email us at lateafternoongaming@gmail.com, or review us on your podcast platform if you have suggestions. Otherwise, enjoy this round of Table Talk.
Well, hello everyone.
Ombudsman report. So I posted this in the chat, so I hope everyone had a little time to chew on it. But we started off, or at some point during Table Talk last time, we were talking about the publishing schedule, where we had some downtimes and we had a week where there was only Table Talk, and I wanted to kind of gauge everyone's opinion on what the appetite is for switching to doing the same thing where we record both on one day, a Table Talk and a session, but then release them on separate weeks. So basically we give ourselves way more buffer by publishing half as often, or rather not publishing two podcasts at the same time. What are your thoughts on that? How willing would you be to do that? I'll outline some of my thoughts on the I'll let everyone else go first.
So I think I'm interested in doing that in cases where we can't record each week. So if we're looking to stretch out the episode releases. But otherwise, I kind of like the way we're already doing it. But I'm not hard on this one.
Jack?
It does seem like it would spread out if we do that, then that means the actual the Delta Green sessions are going to be a twice a month thing, and I don't know if that's the pace that we wanted.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah, I don't want that.
But I understand that also from your perspective, Shepard. That would mean, this takes up more of your time than it takes anyone else. Well, I guess you and Duncan spend the most time, and this would make it so that you have to spend slightly less time because you're preparing sessions less often on Duncan's end, and Shepard, you're editing at half as often. So it's easy for me to say, oh, the current pace is acceptable because it costs me nothing. So I don't feel like my opinion has as much weight as yours would.
Well, I'll agree with that at the very least. Yeah, I mean, given what we're doing right now, I can't imagine that Duncan is spending more time preparing than I am editing, but That's only because editing takes a while. Although I've gotten quite fast at the Delta Green edits, I really don't have to do much, so that doesn't take that long. The downtime edits are killing me right now. They take forever. But yeah, so some of the... You guys kind of hit some of the risk points here. But Jesse, do you have any thoughts on the subject before I go into my analysis?
So I like the more frequent than twice a month, just because it I think keeps people engaged in the main story of the podcast. The downtimes are really fun to space in between that or table talks. But if we want to continue focusing on the main game, I think that it's hard to keep people engaged with just that frequency.
Yeah, I agree. And so I was thinking about it, on the pro side of what we're doing now, we've kind of hit it. Assuming that we're publishing the way we intend to, then you get an episode of Golden River Underground every week, and like we said, you don't have to wait 2 weeks to get another one. Again, assuming that we're all available and that, everything goes correctly. Because right now is a poor time to look at it, just because we've been doing a lot of downtimes and weird things come up where we're not ready to do a session and everything.
Well, but right now is, I think, typical of our work schedules where, for the most part, we're only able to play every 3 weeks or so.
Sure. So, but that goes into the upside of doing them less often. Is right now what we're doing is filling the dead weeks with downtimes, but right now, since I'm the only one running downtimes, that means that my entire weekend is dominated.
Oh yeah, I'll say that I'm not. I don't want to do that. I am beginning to burn out, and so coming into a weekend and playing lots and lots of games is not ideal.
Sure. Well, but then so what's the middle ground here, or what's the answer? So if we want to release, well, so I guess then the answer is we just have more weeks where we release nothing.
Yeah.
Or do something similar where we have the table talks that we, randomly did on a Wednesday every once in a while, and I think those are pretty fun. And still keep at the general pace of about 3 games a month of the Golden River Underground.
That's more where my head is at. Try to get something out each week, but don't worry about it being a game.
And if we can get some other folks to run a downtime that's not you, Shepard, that would be great. And not Duncan.
And that's the thing that I want to make sure is that we've got something every week, because that I'm not some expert on like modern content production by any stretch, but it seems like that's one of the big things that successful people tend to focus on when it comes to like the sort of media environment that we're living in, is making sure that you've got consistent things for your audience, because online audiences apparently tend to be quite fickle, and if you're not producing at a consistent rate, then they're apt to move on and drop people pretty quickly. I imagine for podcasts that's not as true as for like a kid's YouTube channel or something, but I think there's a degree to which it is still a factor that we need to consider if in the event that we actually generate an audience at some point.
I was going to say, I think right now most of the people who listen are going to listen at some point in time, regardless of the schedule. If it continues to get bigger, then I think we'd have to pay a lot more attention to that.
This is true, but given that it would be good to build a good habit now.
Sure, yeah.
And because don't get me wrong, nobody listens to this podcast. We've got
except for us.
We've got 12 subscribers on YouTube, and I know for a fact that like 4 of them don't actually watch anything. And for our podcast, I mean, each one gets like 20 or so listens on average for this season. So interestingly, the D&D ones, I think I might have already mentioned this, but the D&D ones tend to get like a little more views on YouTube and more downloads on the podcast thing, which I don't know why.
I think it's just because it's better. Nobody knows what Delta Green is.
Right.
Yeah, that would be my guess as well, is like it just whatever the algorithm is for those keywords or whatever, these pop up more. So that's what I imagine. So as an example, Golden River Underground Session 8 has 14 views on YouTube, and then the 2 downtimes that come after it, Demon Next Door and Demons of Dima, both have it's 27 and 29 respectively. Which all these numbers are tiny, but they're double the Golden River Underground one. Now, you could say, well, that's because they're standalone downtime ones, but I think that's a little like, you have to know that, and I think most random people who are watching wouldn't, in the event that we're talking about random people. Which brings me to another point, which is that for some reason, half the views we have on average are from non-subscribed people on YouTube, which really surprised me.
Is YouTube the place that people listen to podcasts?
No. And so that was something that I think I brought up a while back, where, the average view duration for, let's say, Table Talk 8.5, I'm looking at it right now, average view duration is about 25 minutes, which is actually pretty high. If I go to Demons of Dima, average view time is, I don't have my glasses on.
Old man.
Anyway, it's usually not average view duration is about 11 minutes, which is high for YouTube. But given that it's a 3.5 hour long video, that's not that much. So
yeah, because I listen to it in the car, which I think is what most people listen to podcasts in, if they're like cleaning or in the car. And so I wonder. I
suspect you're right.
If it would be better to look at the specs on the other podcast things and see if that's different.
Yeah, that's when I listen to it most often, is I'm either in the kitchen, cooking or cleaning or whatever. I have a very short commute, so I can only listen for about like 5 minutes in the car. But yeah, I rarely am I like sitting down and just like closing my eyes and just listening to the podcast. Although that does sound nice. But anyway, yeah, I just wanted to get some thoughts on the content releasing. My second thing I wanted to bring up is I wanted another potato diet update because it's been a while. It's been several weeks. So where are we at with that?
It has. We were talking about this a little bit before we actually started recording, but basically there's not much of an update on the potato diet because I recently hit a professional milestone, and following that went on like a celebratory vacation for about a week, and then after that I got back and have been going out to dinner with a lot of people who were like congratulating me. So I haven't been following the potato diet because I haven't really been in an environment where that's feasible. I'm getting back into it this week.
So you're saying that you were not willing to tell everybody to go away and you were going to just eat potatoes
No,
on your vacation?
I'll go out to dinner, but I'm only going to get fries. And they'll come over and I'll say, did you use oil when you cooked these? Oh, it's in the
sure,
back.
they're called fries.
Yeah.
I just want an uncooked potato on a plate for my celebratory vacation dinner, please.
No, I do have I have 10 pounds of potatoes on my table currently that I will be doing some prep on today, but there will be an update next week.
Okay. Yeah, we were talking about the price last time, and I was shocked because I was like, yeah, I'll give this a shot. Why not? And I similarly ran into some professional circumstances that prevented me from really pursuing the diet too hard. But I think where I went to the store, a 5-pound bag of potatoes was like $4.50. Something like that.
Like, the price saving aspect is significant.
Yeah. And I was like, this is theoretically my food for like the week.
Well, remember, if you want to meet the recommended calorie intake, which you don't want to do because that's the point of the diet, but if you did want to do that, you'd be eating one of those bags every day.
But even still, even if I was doing that, that's still not very expensive.
No, it's really not.
Yeah. But I would look like an insane person going to the store and then I've just got a shopping cart full of all the 5-pound bags of potatoes that the store has. And I just stare at the cash register operator.
What are you gonna say about
it? Say
cashier,
something.
Yeah.
Go up to them and say, could you like increase your order? Like I know you guys kind of have a plan for how many potatoes you get, and I need you to like double that.
Maybe triple it.
Just for me.
Yeah.
We have they've sort of recently installed some self-checkout stations at the grocery store nearest my house, and whenever this happens, because this coincidentally also happened where I lived last, where like while I was there, they started installing the self-checkout. It seems like, all the cashiers are always eyeing them with like this eye of disdain, like, oh my god, these machines are taking our jobs kind of thing, which is understandable. However, what I found in both places was that the service on the cashier end, if you got in one of the, regular lines, like got worse. And I was like, man, they're really not, doing any arguments in favor of, keeping this system around. I.e., I would go to the standard line and do that, and then no one would bag my stuff anymore. I'm like, okay, if I'm bagging it myself, then what is the difference between this line and the self-checkout line?
Do you
know a lot of times
all the fruit codes and the vegetable codes?
You can just search it. It's super fast. I don't feel like with the self-checkout system, it doesn't seem like it's much slower than what the cashier is doing. Because I'm sure there is some like 5-number code or whatever, but then I can just search onion or whatever, and it comes up real quick, and it's a little slower, but not significantly.
For you, you've sat there and you've watched people really like struggle with that.
This is true. Well, and every once in a while something's coded really weird, or like the system is bad. Where let's say I'm buying green onion, where you search green. And it's not on there, but then you search onion, and then it's like, oh yeah, onion, green, and it like the search algorithm stinks. But yeah, I'm a big self-checkout fan. I usually only use the standard line when I've got a ton of stuff and I just don't want to bag it myself. But then if they make me bag it anyway, then I say, you know what, the machine should take over. We don't deserve this.
Well, they've in some stores they've transitioned so it's only the self-checkout and there's nobody. that's actually doing that, and it caused a revolt back home. Everybody was so furious, and I spent many of hours on the phone with my family getting to hear about how they were never going back. Apparently, they changed it back, and now there's people again. So
what was the argument? Was it the robots are taking our jobs, or this is too hard?
No, it was I don't want to just have only self-checkout. I hate everything about this, and I want to go to a line and engage with people. And I was like, okay, cool.
I can understand that. I mean, I am so socially starved that sometimes talking to the cashier at the grocery store is the only time I'm going to talk to somebody all day. So I can understand that.
Yeah, I always bring a ring with me just in case, I find the one in the line.
Yeah, that's smart. Next topic I've got. So I've been running a lot of downtimes, and in fact ran 2 last night that we're going to be publishing next week and the following week. And we talk a lot about DCC, and we have also sort of talked about a lot of the pitfalls or the things that kind of are a little stinky about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, which is what we were playing during campaign 1. So a reasonable question to ask would be, why do I keep running downtime in 5th edition? And I'd like for us to just kind of talk about 5th edition and DCC and stuff like that, because we talk a lot about DCC, but I don't think we've really had we just mention it a lot, I guess I should say, without really talking about it in any substantive sense. The short answer for why I run 5th edition games is because it's the system I know. But Duncan, I know you mostly do DCC these days. So can you just kind of talk through some of the things about it that you like as a system over 5e?
Sure. In a word, simplicity. So Dungeons & Dragons is relatively complicated. The players have a tremendous number of character sheet options, races, classes, things like that. And so it's I think on the one hand you could look at it and you're tempted to say, well, more options, how could that be bad? But anyone who's sat down for an evening with Netflix knows that it's not that simple. So in my experience, both with regular players and with newer players, having that many choices doesn't seem to make the game more fun. And I think it's one of those things that it's worth just trying, even if you think it's bullshit. There's an interesting passage at the beginning of the Dungeon Crawl Classics book where in Dungeon Crawl Classics you don't write your character. You randomly generate your character. And in the beginning of the book, they tell you this, and they acknowledge right there, they're like, we know immediately after reading this that you're inclined probably to ignore that rule and house rule it out so you can write your own character.
I know, I thought that, for sure.
Try not doing that. Just try it our way first, and we think you will find that it's actually a more fun session when you just let the chips fall where they may. And in my experience, I found that to be true. So I'll give a brief example. I was running an in-person game, mostly for coworkers, but for a few other people that I didn't know that well. And some of these people had never played D&D before. And I think in our first session, it was a little more of a workshop where people showed up, they brought snacks and stuff like that, and then I brought some rule books and printouts, and I coached them through how to make a character. And then we did a kind of a tutorial style game where I had a session that stepped through a bunch of different important parts of the rules. So by the end of it, they had a rough idea of how to play. And one of the first questions out of the gate, before we had even sat down, was one of the players who had never played before asking if they could multi-class.
Oh, good.
And this is kind of tricky because on the one hand, it's cool that they had an idea for something that they wanted to do, but on the other hand, I knew that was very likely to be distracting, and overly complicated for someone who hadn't played before, so I said no, which I think surprised that player because Dungeon Masters aren't allowed to say no. Which is sort of a cultural DM thing of like, I'm supposed to indulge every whim, so she was very taken aback by that. But no, I found that in general with D&D and games like D&D, Pathfinder's another example. And when I say games like D&D, I mean pretty robust, complicated games that have a lot of mechanics to them. You look at the rules, and there are a lot of rules for a lot of things, and it's funny because we look at all those different rules and we see options, but there are actually far more options in a game that has fewer rules. Things take a long time to adjudicate. There's a lot more pausing to look up rules. There are a lot more cases where, like in D&D, when you level, you continue to have options. You have a stat upgrade to do, or you have some subclass that you're going to enter into at the next level, and you're thinking about that. And so, especially once you start incorporating non-core D&D books, when you look at a given class, it's pages and pages of material, options, big long spell lists, stuff like that. It's complicated. And when you look at something like DCC, it's extremely simple. Class descriptions are 2 or 3 pages long, and as you level up, you get better. In fact, there's a table at the end of each class section that tells you, from level 1 to level 2, here's how your hit die changes, here's how your hit bonus and damage bonus changes and things like that. But you don't get new abilities, you just get better at the ones you already have, and it's a significant enough difference that it feels really good, but it doesn't slow anything down. And there's no agonizing over how to level. You roll 1 die, you roll your hit die to get some new HP, and then you're done. So, kind of a long-winded response to your question, but I've just found that it's much, much easier to get playing faster, either with veteran players or with new players, with something like DCC. And then instead of focusing on optimizing which feats to pick so they can max out their damage, or, doing rules lookups or anything like that, my DCC games tend to be, much more pure fun and conversation. And so, in my old age, I'm pretty much exclusively playing systems that are much, much leaner, like DCC, because at the end of the day, just the fun factor seems to be a lot higher.
Yeah. Well, and that the thing that definitely entices me the most as you describe it is, it seems like it's faster and it's more conversational. I love playing D&D, even after all the drama that happened earlier this year. Like, I love D&D, and I do love all the things that I love the options as you level up, but I'm always focusing on 2 different things. I'm focusing on how fun is it to play versus how good a listening experience is it, where can those 2 things meet the most. And I think that DCC probably podcasts a lot better in general than 5e does. And so I know that the next, the campaign thing that I want to run next, I'm planning on learning DCC and running it in that instead of doing it in 5th edition.
Yeah, and I do think there's maybe a false obstacle where you may be inclined to think that since no one knows what DCC is, then it's easier to run something in 5th edition. This happens in the game I was referring to earlier, the in-person game that I run for some of my coworkers. And of course, no one coming in knows what DCC is. Whereas a lot of people know about D&D, but in practice, to actually get one of these people at the table, they don't actually know how to play D&D well enough to take advantage. They're not sitting right down and jumping in. They need some kind of refresher, and then they haven't played this edition of D&D, and then they played with a DM that had some house rules that changed it a little bit and stuff like that. So it actually isn't, you don't lose time by giving them the 10-minute pitch for, hey, here's what DCC is and here's how it's different. And Jesse can attest to this. We've done this many, many times at this point. Someone new will come in either to play for a single session or because they think they'll want to join our group. And with DCC, you can actually buy scratch-off character sheets. And so you can give someone... I can give a 5-minute pitch of what the deal is with DCC, either relating it to D&D if they've played that before, or if they're totally new to TTRPGs, I could do it a little bit differently. We can spend 5 to 10 minutes of them scratching stuff off their character sheet, and we can explain what it means along the way, and then we're playing.
Yeah, and it is really approachable for anybody who hasn't played. I tried to get some friends to play D&D in the past, and they're like, nope, too complicated, too intimidating. And we pulled them into DCC, and it was like, hey, you don't need to know anything, and you can jump right in. And for me as the player, one of the things that I always really, really stressed out when I was playing 5e or Pathfinder of what if I picked the wrong feat or the wrong distribution of my skills and stuff like that, and it stressed me out so much, and it made it a lot less fun versus this where you scratch it off, or even if you do get a pick, it's just a lot less stressful because there's a lot less things that you can choose wrong on, and so for me that made it a lot more fun, that I could just play the character that I had.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, is the agonizing over choices is just effectively taken out of the game. Another thing that's cool for especially new players, a couple of times I've done something where we bring someone new into the game and I give them a scratch-off character sheet, and they only get to scratch things off when they need to use them for the first time. So
that is pretty funny.
It's also kind of a cool way to introduce someone into the concepts of playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
So, they get a very little bit of basic character information at the top of the sheet first, who they are, what their occupation is, we'll show them what their items are, that kind of thing. But then, if they need to climb something or hit something or whatever, well, then they scratch off those stats. And so over the course of the first session or two, they kind of learn who their character is a little more organically. That's a fun way to do things. But yeah, I think ultimately there are a lot of D&D players and players of other TTRPGs that are good students of the game, that have the references and like spending time with them and enjoy on their own building a detailed character and reading through all the different options and selecting the right ones and crafting something. But there are a lot more players that have little to no interest in that and want to show up and play a team game, and they're just not going to do anything on their own, or maybe they don't have time to. And so something like DCC I think is much better suited to that, where there just isn't anything for you to do by yourself. One exception maybe being if you're a spellcaster, and so you may want to spend some time reading through that stuff. But by and large, it is a show up to the table and do it. We do 3-hour sessions in the group I'm referring to, once a week. Realistically, we play for 2 to 2.5 hours because the other one's eaten up by, we eat dinner together, and we tend to, eat at the beginning and transition to snacking later on. And I mean, the logistical aspects of the game, the lookups and things like that they're few and far between. They probably have a total footprint of maybe 10 minutes on a 2.5 hour game.
Yeah, I can level up a new person for when we hit the next level in less than 5 minutes.
And I have found that engagement in any of these games, the key there is, or a key is momentum. And whether that's being able to get through turns in combat very quickly, or it's just, I don't know, adjudicating actions quickly. so that the gap between a player having an idea and that idea like turning into action that actually occurs within the story, minimizing that gap seems to be really important to maintaining everyone's attention and getting people to have ideas. And lean systems are just better.
One thing that it really stuck out to me as a big difference as we were pulling in new folks was we had a session when we were playing 5e, and somebody was like switching weapons, and it was a whole back and forth, really drawn out discussion about it being an action, and then you had to load it and all this stuff.
Does it take an action? I thought I get a free hand action every turn.
Right, and so it would take several minutes to kind of, and then there was like this decision paralysis of like, oh shoot, I think I need to have my melee weapon, and instead I've got the crossbow, and and versus, I brought somebody in for a DCC game, and was just like, here's your weapon, go for it, and was able to jump right in. And especially when I was first playing, the people that I first started playing with a long time ago were not very good at helping me work through the rules, because I was playing Pathfinder, and I got very confused and mostly just got like scolded for not being good at figuring the rules out. And then that was really discouraging, and I didn't want to play for a really long time. And so...
Yeah, I think that specific thing, the like, what can I do in a turn of combat? I have seen the light go out of someone's eyes so many times at this point. Either as a DM who fumbles that a little bit, or as a player at someone else's table, where there's some maybe overly complicated and certainly overly rigid set of rules determining what someone can do in their turn. And so you'll see this new player kind of getting their feet under them, and it comes to their turn and they say, okay, I want to do this and this and this. They did exactly what they were supposed to, and they've spent the last couple of minutes while other people were taking their turns coming up with exactly what they want to do, and they're ready to say it, and they do. And then they're told, well, actually, you only have, that's actually 2 actions, and you have an action and a bonus action, and this is what that means. And, and they go, oh, okay, well, I guess I don't do that then. Yeah, and I really don't like that. So
Is that not an issue in DCC? Can you just do everything on your turn?
Well, no.
In DCC, the rules are simple enough, I think, that those mistakes are less likely. It's a lot more... likely that people will come up with a turn that actually works, I think.
Yes, that's part of it. Yeah, I think it's a few different things, maybe 3 things, and it's not all about the rules. So one is that exactly what Jack said, the rules are simpler, and so it's less confusing. 2 is that the whole thing's a lot faster, and so there's a much less sting. I'm not telling you, yeah, you're wrong, and you can try again in 10 minutes. Yeah, I'm telling you, like, you're wrong, and you can try again in like 2 minutes, maybe less. But the third one is not a rules thing, but just like a DM rigidity thing, where regardless of the system, although it's easier to deploy in a simple, more flexible system like DCC, like in combat, just let them do whatever makes sense given how long a round of combat is. If it's 6 seconds, just instead of consulting your matrix to find out what is an action and what is a bonus action, just roll with it. Like, is it more fun for that player and probably everyone in the group if they can just do what they wanted to do? Then just let them do it. I don't think, except for some pretty particular circumstances, enforcing rules that eliminate what the player wants to do is rarely fun, because that's not a constraint. Like, I understand how constraints can make things fun, where they can't just do whatever they want. They can't take flight and shoot laser beams at the enemy and blow them up or something like that. They only have certain abilities and things like that. But if they're if their decision space is constrained and so they have an interesting problem to solve, I get that. I understand the value of that. If within that they come up with a solution and they're excited to implement it and everybody else is too, and then you say, well, actually this book says that's not allowed in an imagination world, that just rarely seems to make it more fun for anyone. So I really shy from that. And you know, so I think there's and I'm sure you have thoughts on this, Shepard. So I want to kick this ball back to you. I think exactly what I just described can be very frustrating for someone who knows the rules well, because then the question becomes, well, am I shooting myself in the foot by even learning the rules if there are no rules in this game? You know, if the DM is going to say yes to everything, then, you know, should I throw the rule book out? And so there's a potential for frustration there. But again, I think this leads us back to DCC, where DCC is right now just a placeholder for simpler games. So I think ultimately DCC is or Dungeons and Dragons is the most prominent game, mostly because of its historical position, but also because there's a tremendous amount of content generated for it, and a lot of people have had many excellent experiences with it. But I don't think it's the best, either for veteran players or to bring in newer players, and I think this is one of the reasons why, because it's gotten away a little bit from what makes this hobby fun to begin with, which is flexible, imaginative play. I think it's too rigid, and I think it encourages rigidity.
Yeah, I definitely, I'm glad you brought up the point that I was going to bring up. It's something I wrote about maybe like a month or two ago, where I do think that being too loose with what you allow punishes players who do spend the time learning the rules of a game, where or not punishes, but it disincentivizes people from learning the rules, because someone who knows the rules, if they start doing things that they know violates them based on precedents you've set at the table, that's cheating. They're breaking the rules without consulting the arbiter of the rules for doing it. Whereas somebody who doesn't know the rules can just do whatever they want, I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean. They can be more free with the rule system because they don't know it, and that's not evil, or it's not malicious in that sense, because they don't know they're breaking rules. They don't know what the rules are. So you put people who have spent time learning the rules in a position where they're either cheating or like restraining themselves in a way that no one else has to.
And on the one hand, I mean, clearly I acknowledge that. On the other hand, I think it's an extremely robotic and legalistic way to look at the game. So, you know, this probably isn't news to anyone, but you have to change how you play and run things based on who you're playing with. In this coworker game, there are no power gamers. And I don't mean like they're not allowed. I mean, we don't have them. And so running a loose game where the players have a good idea, a healthy idea of what they're able to do turn by turn. And I very rarely have to tamp down on anything. For the most part, they say, I want to do this. And we say, okay, here's what happens. And it's quick and it's fun, and it doesn't rob us of like a detailed game. I think Jesse will attest that we have like a actually very detailed, very sweeping game at this point, more so than any of us expected. But if I'm running something that has someone who is a power gamer, or not even necessarily a power gamer, but someone who's just going to put in a lot of time to read the rule books on their own, and that's their thing, is they're going to learn the game inside and out, and that's what they're showing up to the table with, and they're going to craft a character that is compliant with all the rules that they looked up, and they maybe to some degree expect to be rewarded for their mastery of what's, of all the things I just described. If you have a player like that who is going to feel cheated when another player, gets something by dint of like luck or imagination and not preparation, then I think that's more of a personality management problem than it is a game problem.
I usually feel like those kinds of players do not mix well, because especially the people who don't have time to read all the rules and get really, really in depth into it. And as soon as someone starts like C-loring them about the rules, they're like, I don't care anymore, and then they stop playing. But then the people who do love like knowing all that, and they find that that's really a rewarding part of the game, then it's annoying to them that they're just running around, in the Wild West. And so I like to split that out and have the people who want it to be the very rules based, in a separate game, compared to like just there to have fun and somebody will tell me if I'm breaking the rule.
To tack onto that, my dream isn't that my players who don't know the rules very well learn them better. There's some things they need to know how to do for technical reasons, like they need to be comfortable doing things like rolling weapon attacks. And if they're spellcasters, they need to know the rules for casting their spells. Not inside and out, but well enough that they can do it quickly. Well enough that they can get through it without slowing us down. But I don't think we have anyone who really cares much about it beyond that. I know the rules well enough that, and this is another thing I like about DCC, is somehow, for whatever reason, it seems like a lot of the, it's easier to pull some of the calculation and adjudication back behind the DM screen, and so it's quicker that way. Only one person needs to know some of this stuff, and if you don't know how to do it, you can fudge it, and nobody will know, and it's quick. But I'm not. I don't have a goal to get us more rules compliant. The game is purring like a kitten right now, and I think that is largely because people have a reasonably good idea of what they're able to do, and in conversational terms, if not like technical or mechanical ones, and that's I think totally fine and fast.
And if they forget to explain it, takes half a second. You're like, oh, pull these 2 dice, roll it, boom. And
right, and I would much rather say, broadly, your turn is like whatever you can do in 6 seconds. I think that is for most people, that is a more engaging and fun thing than saying, well, the following list of things are actions. The following list is bonus actions. You have this many feet of movement, and that monster's actually 35 feet away, so you have 30 feet, couldn't quite make it. So I know you said you were running to attack the monster, but actually you run 5 feet shy of the monster and your turn is over. That is just a fundamentally unsatisfying, uncinematic kind of thing. The situations vary. I'm also not saying my players succeed at everything all the time. They definitely don't. I don't know. And another thing here, though, that I think helps to clarify the 6 seconds thing is I tend to stand at the end of the table while my players sit. And I tend to pantomime a lot of what the PCs or the NPCs are doing, and so everything they do, just about, I ask them, how does that work? What does it look like? When you slash at the goblin with your sword, and they'll talk through it, and so it's very clear how long things take and how difficult they might be and how they might go wrong. It's not just clicking the attack button. And so I think that goes a long way towards helping players figure out how much doing something should cost them. I don't know if that makes any sense or really how related it is to what we're talking about, but it seems to help.
Yeah. I go back to what I was saying before, just different styles of, people playing different games, or obviously things mix better or worse. Because I think what this comes down to a lot between you and me, Duncan, is that we have kind of different ideals of like the kinds of people we're playing with or the way the game works. So a lot of the stuff you're saying about DCC, again, I do want to run my next thing in DCC because the speed really appeals to me. But like when I'm thinking of like, oh, who's the dream player at my table? It's like Nerf, who is going to sink his teeth into the books and like learn the rules and figure out what is like what you can and can't do, and then use the imagination to figure out what to do within those limitations. And then theoretically, then it's very fair because everyone has the same picture of what's possible, or whatever. So, for example, nobody's taking extra attacks on their turn when they shouldn't because they don't know the rules, which in some ways invalidates choices that other characters made.
See,
other players made for their character.
And that's where, I mean, I acknowledge this because I know you feel that way. I don't feel that way. Like the type of player you're describing is someone who shows up at the table with the baggage of like other players succeeding at things may hurt my feelings. If I think they got there through some unfair means or something like that. And that is not, I don't want to say it's unusual because I'm sure a lot of people feel this way, but it's not something I encounter a lot at the tables where I run. And it does make things harder as a DM to know that, okay, generally I have players that are very excited to see the other players succeed. To have players that are, I guess, like, want to make sure that there's a kind of a governor on the success of the other players, makes it, that's a challenge.
So if I could offer a perspective that's a little less, an alternate perspective on that. So let's say Jack and I are both players at the same table. Jack is playing a rogue in 5th edition and I'm playing a fighter, and we're both 5th level.
Yep.
One of the cool things about being 5th level as a fighter is I now get 2 attacks per turn. Right, which is really cool because rogues do more damage per attack. They have sneak attack typically, like they'll engineer situations that allow them to do more damage. So if like that's a way that our characters are both, we're equalizing in the sense of, things that we can do effectively. I now get twice as many attacks as he does. That balances the amount of damage that he is able to do extra. And so if we both understand the rules, then our like roles within the party are somewhat equalized, and we both got our strengths and weaknesses. If then the DM allows him to attack twice per turn, then it makes me feel as a player that has made the choices that give me the abilities I have, that like it sort of makes it seem like I'm not bummed that Jack can do more damage. I'm bummed that the time I put into looking into the books and reading the rules was pointless.
No, I understand that. I think what I'm saying is, I don't know. This is tough to put into words, but there's really no way at the table I run. There's no way for you to like go home and do additional push-ups or take steroids or anything like that, so that you can come back to the table and outperform. It's just a fun thing that we do together on Monday nights, and we tell a good story and people have a good time. And anyone who's looking to, can I spend money or can I spend time or something so that when I come back I can effectively do more damage or generally be more successful in combat? Not really. And to attempt that would be to miss the point of the evening.
I would also say that it's if somebody ends up getting like a double attack because they messed up the rules, it's not something that they get forever. It was, you got something, you pulled the wool over Duncan's eyes, good job, you beat the DM, which doesn't happen. And then the next time you're not gonna be able to do that. And so it's not like a recurring every single time from then on, now this person gets 2 attacks.
That's a good point. I think there's a big difference between structurally advantaging one player, based on some fundamental, bad ruling or misunderstanding of the rules. And it's another thing to say, for a new player, for example, let's go back to that. New guy shows up at the table, and he's excited to play, and it gets around to his turn, and he says he wants to do something, and it's technically not allowed per the rules. You have a couple of different options. You can say, in essence, no, do something else. And of course, you can deliver that in a more diplomatic way. You can explain why it doesn't quite work like that. You can give them a couple of other options, like why don't you do this or that. But you are saying no. You can also say yes, and let's lock that in. You're now a permanent rule breaker. Sorry, everyone else. This guy, it has superpowers. That's also probably the wrong move. There's a, I think, very acceptable and understandable middle ground that also serves the objective of speed, where you say, yeah, as long as it's not anything crazy, or maybe even if it is, you let them do it for a turn, and you tell them, okay, well, that's actually 2 actions, and so normally you'd only be able to attack once per turn, but, I'll let you do that, but you gotta roll a lower die for the second one or something, and you some kind of quick compromise with a correction, and you let them do what they wanted to do. Everybody's happy, but I think, again, it all comes back to flexibility of, like, how do you... I generally don't want to tell players no. I do sometimes, but I try to make it not a just flat, naked no. It's an adjustment.
The other thing for new players is usually the first time when they come up with something, they're like really excited, like, oh, I got this really good idea. And I just remember one of the guys, brand new, it was the first time I ever played, and he had like a pitchfork or something. He's like, he had the pitchfork, and then he wanted to try to like jump on the guy's back and do something or whatever. And it was like really funny, and we all were just like, I don't even care at that point what the specific rule of the mechanics of jumping and doing this thing. It was just like awesome that he came up with something different and funny, and so it was like, okay, next time do this other thing, and then you'll be good to go. But that was hilarious enough that we want you to go ahead and do it.
That's another good point, which is either as a consequence of the speed of the game or just the players that we have at the table, probably both. Generally when we play DCC, it's less a case of, or because taking turns is so simple, people do not spend the whole round preparing for their turn, and so instead they pay attention to other people's turns. And so, they get when players describe what they're going to do for their turn, the other players get, excited and invested in that. And instead of seeing what another player is doing, recognizing that it's an illegal move and calling foul, like saying like, actually that's not allowed. And I would prefer that they not do that. People tend to just be excited about it. And I don't know. It's like socially, it's a very different mode, I guess. So yeah, I don't know. I understand what you're saying, but the kind of the very logical, legalistic approach of we all have to live underneath this system, and so I want to basically unlock higher performance by outstudying the other people at the table potentially. Is not, that's not my preference. I don't run games like that.
Sure. I would just be, again, I think we're my concern is that we're characterizing like rule management and rule knowledge as overly negative, and so as an alternate perspective, I would characterize it as ensuring that players who do invest time in learning the rules, which I don't think we should look at as they must be a power gamer or something like that. I think that it preserves some fairness for them, and you can readjust everybody, and assuming people are paying attention, they can learn the rules, and it preserves some fairness for everybody if you understand the rules, assuming there aren't any like weird inconsistencies in the rules that allow for people who again want to sink their teeth into it and learn the rules really well, and not even just to optimize and get one more damage, but just to preserve some fairness and make sure that they're not cheating or something like that.
See, but you're introducing all kinds of concepts that I think just don't exist maybe in my games, like fairness and cheating.
Well, I would also say that in terms of fairness, simplifying the rules the way that it would in like DCC streamlines things, makes it easier for people to get into it, reduces misunderstandings, and I don't know that it makes things any less fair. So if that's your concern, I don't know that a D&D would be the optimal choice. Not that optimal really matters or something like it. Like, it's a game, you do what you enjoy. But if your main concern is fairness, I don't see D&D winning that fight necessarily. I don't see why expanding the rule sets makes things more fair.
No, it's not about the size of the rule sets making things more or less fair. It's about my point is that when you've got more rules, you do need to know more rules in order to preserve fairness in the event that you have players who are interested in also learning those rules.
Right, and what I'm saying is the fairness that you're describing, what I think you mean, and I correct me if this is not sufficiently charitable, but is making sure that the performance of the player characters is in line with the rules. And so fairness is not allowing someone who doesn't know the rules to inadvertently benefit from their lack of knowledge of the rules, which has the kind of flip side effect of people who do understand the rules well should generally be more successful. And I think, like, I just don't have players that want to read rulebooks. That's not what's fun for them generally. They like lore maybe, and they want to understand the basics of how the game works, but they're not going to read this hundreds of page long book because they want to know exactly how the jumping mechanic works off the top of their head. So having a large body of rules that then they need to read in order to be more successful just doesn't. It seems like unnecessary steps towards a suboptimal conclusion in our context. So yeah, at the end of the day, like, I clearly prefer a looser, more sandboxy game that has more. Like, at the end, there's no substitute for just good DM judgment. That's, I think, far more important than any rule or set of rules. And you're exercising good DM judgment if, like, people are consistently having fun throughout your sessions. And so I think different right answers for different groups. Like, it may well be that for your group, a relatively complex set of rules where people are able to take time out of game, go read them, master those rules. Maybe mastery of the rules is in and of itself just a satisfying thing that, or overcoming them as a group is another satisfying thing. It doesn't seem to be what the group I'm describing enjoys. It's not really what I enjoy. And so I think it would just, and having done it both ways with this same group, that seems to bog us down much more than just having a simple set of rules, generally flexibly applied by a DM who's more we don't think in terms of fairness is I guess why I'm bringing up that, or I don't, and Jesse, you can correct me there. I don't think my players are looking turn after turn at what happens through the lens of fairness and then feeling put out if one player character got away with something that they didn't think was entirely on the up and up.
Yeah, no. Well,
I think it's much more of, seeing all the player characters like up on the movie screen. One of them, and it's sort of a Gimli versus Legolas situation where, they're trying to tally up kills and stuff like that, but it's much more playful than it is legalistic.
Yeah. Well, and I think in the instances where you end up playing with a group that is a lot more in the weeds of the rules, what I've seen at least is that it's not that they get away with extra stuff. It's usually they forget that they can do certain things. And so they're not taking advantage of all the things that they could or should be doing. And so they're a lot less effective. And so that's typically the way that I've seen it is that they're actually just not as effective as the players who end up, so from a fairness perspective, like, they're dragging the rest of the group down. And then if you're on the opposite side of things, then it's more story based than any kind of big measurement between things.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, this is just more of a taste thing than anything else. I understand the desire to have a more coherent rules-based framework, and then I understand that if you're going to run a game like that, then you want all the players there to understand what the rules are. I've definitely encountered that before, but that's not where my tastes lie. And generally, the games that I'm setting up now, that's not what I'm structuring them for.
And
when I eventually run something, it's going to be a homebrewed mystery system that hasn't been checked by anybody. So it'll be the most balanced thing possible.
Yeah.
I think from a listenability perspective, if I was, my guess would be that a DCC game, is more on that listenability because it's more about storytelling and what are the characters sort of doing as you're describing it, rather than the mechanics of either reloading or the bonus action or throwing something. And so I think it'll be really interesting for us to play DCC on the podcast and see how that changes versus our downtimes that we do, especially for the people like me and Caboose who don't play on the podcast regularly.
Well, and what I found though in different in-person games, paying more and more attention to player attention and enthusiasm, I went through a period where I thought, okay, DCC is maybe more listenable for exactly the reasons you described, but then in person, maybe a game that's more complex is more desirable, where you can do these measurements or whatever, and everyone's like actually there to see it and engage with it. I no longer think that's true. I don't know that there's really any difference between listenability and playability in that sense. I'm pretty fully converted to the simple game side of the house.
Fair enough. As you say, different strokes, different folks, or it's a matter of taste.
Although one thing will be interesting is if you do a DCC and if D&D is what's causing all of the filters to pop, from a viewing perspective, and you switch over, then you'll go back to a system like Delta Green where nobody's heard of it and make it hard for people to find it. Even if it is more listenable.
And that though is a price I'll happily pay. Ultimately, this is our game that we'll run in whatever way we decide as a group is best for us. And I'm not, as much as I think it would be cool to have listeners, the level of catering I'm willing to do for that doesn't extend to, which system we use.
Yeah, well, and I also suspect that the players that Duncan has at his, or that you have at your in-person table, are probably a much more typical kind of player than like the kind of player that I'm looking for. Excuse me. Or my stated sort of ideal that I mentioned earlier.
Shepard
and so
only wants top tier professional competitive players.
I have these garden variety players. I'm poking fun. I know that's not what you mean.
No, I was just waiting for you guys to be done. No, what I'm saying is that what I mean by that is that I think systems like DCC, because I think they cater more towards, as Duncan likes to call them, the hobbyist gamer. I think that is more popular. I think like the hobby is shifting more in that direction of let's find a system that's rules light, that takes less prep, and we can just get into the game. I think that is a more popular playstyle now, and so I think that games that cater more towards that, like DCC, will probably become more popular, and to the point where maybe not that it's more popular than D&D, but that it's not going to get punished in the algorithm for people. It'll become popular enough that it's easy to find for an actual play or something like that. So I think long term, to your point, Jesse, I don't think that like playing DCC long term will hurt you algorithmically in terms of making the filters pop and things like that.
I mean, I think it will. I don't think anything is D&D from like a cultural cachet standpoint is in no danger of being like overtaken. DCC also unlikely to develop any level of popularity that it doesn't already have. I think I want to agree with what you're saying in theory, but in practice, I think the inertia behind stuff like D&D is more important than like what systems would be optimal for different types of groups.
We just need Stranger Things to have a storyline where they switch from D&D to DCC, and then it'll explode.
I also
That's a really good idea.
kind of object to the sort of D&D is for hardcore players and DCC is for casual one dichotomy. We're kind of getting into, I know you like chocolate ice cream, but, that's only because you don't have the taste to appreciate vanilla as the superior flavor. I really think it's just different. Like, one is more mechanical and the other is less mechanical. And it is just a taste thing.
So I think I may have phrased it poorly. But what I meant to say is that DCC, because it is more rules light, makes it easier for people who don't want to learn a lot of rules to play it. Not that it's exclusively for, lazy layabout players, but that it is easier for people to just pick up and go. And so especially, it is easier for newer players or people who want simpler games to play that than it is to play D&D. And so that's why I think it might end up becoming not more popular than D&D, but more popular than it is, and therefore become more searchable. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah, maybe so.
Not that it either is exclusive to either of those audiences.
Can I propose putting a cap in this? Because it doesn't seem like we're getting anywhere. There's not a whole lot of progress being made in this conversation. We've been talking about it for a while now.
That's a good point.
All right.
Chuck that up for the win for the DCC side and just move on.
There you go. One of the other things that, and this is vaguely related to what we were talking about, in terms of, maybe not.
Just build
we
flexibility.
were talking. No, it was. I'm going to my next point on the Ombudsman report, which is just about character libraries, and I just wanted to mention that once the website gets up and running, I do think it would be interesting for anyone who's got a library of unused characters. I know I do, and I suspect somebody else on the server does as well. It'd be interesting to kind of post those and get people's opinions on like character backstories that we had written. I love writing character backstories, and I've got a ton of them. I think that would be a fun thing to publish and get people talking about if we get the website up.
It's all you, Duncan.
Speaking of which, what's the word on the website?
Slow, steady progress.
That's what I'm talking about.
Coming soon in 2027.
Hey, but it's better to release it complete, right? That's the Nintendo strategy, right? You if you release it, well, I don't remember what the phrase was, but it's like if you have a bad release, it's always bad. But if you if you just wait a little bit until it's good, then that's like a superior option.
It was something like a delayed game is eventually good, but a bad game is always bad.
Yeah, I think that was it. Much more concise than what I was saying. And the last thing I had on here was, if you look at the descriptions for the GRU episodes, especially for the last couple, or like, my little summary of it, I keep saying like, our characters failed to make any progress or something like that. But I think if I was listening to session 8 the other day as I was preparing for today, and I was really kind of blown away by actually how many things happen in each episode. Given that each one is usually it's like an hour and a half or shorter recently, which is pretty short on the actual play side, I think. Excuse me. But we really do pack a lot of like scenes into each episode. If you really chart out like all the interactions we have and the story beats that happen. We aren't making progress in the sense that we keep like kind of running into dead ends or bad things that happen, and so it often seems like it's a 1 step forward, 2 steps back. But from a story perspective, like it is moving forward at actually a relatively rapid rate, which I think is actually pretty funny. And I think that relies heavily on it being entirely roleplay focused. Like no one's fired a gun yet or anything like that in this campaign so far. So, just something I thought was pretty remarkable based on what we've been doing so far in GRU.
Yeah, I guess I don't have a great idea of how quickly these things do progress, because I don't play a ton of Delta Green, but going through and listening to the sessions, it is like, they're several scenes where with a lot happening per episode, and to your point, the episodes are not actually that long compared to a lot of the other stuff that's out there. So it seems like we hit a pretty good pace.
Yeah, well, and one thing that we've talked about before is that, at least on this server, with this group of people, we usually do one-shots with Delta Green. So we're usually flying through an investigation and sort of taking a lot of things, I'm about to phrase it incorrectly, we're, metagaming sort of to a point. Like, for example, how do these people get involved in this crazy scenario, and why are they so willing to, throw their lives away for this thing? And we just kind of hand wave that because we need to get to the to make the investigation happen. Whereas with this one, we're doing an actual campaign and we're taking our time developing motivation and really explaining how two otherwise normal people get wrapped up in something very extraordinary. And so that's a little weird for us. I don't know how weird that is. I don't listen to any Delta Green actual plays, so I don't know how uncommon that is overall in the podcasting space.
Well, I think this gets to something that's tricky about running a game like this, where one of the hard things about running Delta Green is it's both very deadly. Like any physical altercation may have game ending or otherwise, very dire consequences.
Often.
And there's a high probability that the enemies you encounter will be like gods or supernatural, or it's not only do fights go badly for you, but they're also not fair.
Right.
And so as a result, Delta Green is it's very avoidant. And so in one shots, generally the way that they're written is there's some kind of forcing factor, some kind of time pressure or something like that gives the player some sense of urgency that causes them to throw caution to the wind. And so they're, it's still really deadly and the chances of success are low, but you just got to bite the bullet kind of stuff. With this campaign, I haven't done that. I haven't started it that way. You're not Delta Green agents, or you're not Delta Green agents yet. And so the pacing has been very different than it would be during a conventional one-shot written to be played in a single session or a handful of sessions.
Yeah, which, as I've said before, I really like. And in fact, I remember a couple weeks ago, I was talking to you, Duncan, offline. We took it offline. And I was saying, what are some funny ideas? Like, for example, what if the chief is a Delta Green friendly and he's blocking all of my attempts to figure out who this FBI agent is? Or things like that. Like the sort of the depth that we've reached with some characters and the way they interact with the system opens up a lot of potentially very funny things that you could do to us within the system or against our characters, which that's just an example. But there's given that we're taking it so slow and we're exploring Golden River a little more, there's a lot more space for things that typically you don't have time for or you don't have the right setup for in standard Delta Green games, as I understand them.
Yeah, I mean we have a lot of options. It's definitely a sandboxy campaign.
I would go as far as saying the most sandboxy thing I've played. I love Golden River Underground. I think it's really great.
Well, and I think because you aren't getting into a bunch of fights every episode, you don't spend an hour in a time frame that's 5 minutes, and instead we're that hour and a half is days, and so it's more like a radio show that you're listening to, and which I really like.
And for any listeners wondering what we're talking about with respect to deadliness or stuff, if in that scene in the clearing when Tim got held up by those two agents and they stole the antenna, if he tried to fight back and one of them shot him, he doesn't take a nap and roll a couple of hit die and then come back to full health. He's been shot, and he may die right there. He may die on the way to the hospital. He may go to the hospital and then need to have surgery to remove the bullet and otherwise like restore him to normal working order, and then he's gonna have to recover, and he may have to go through like physical therapy, or like it's it's a big deal. He got shot. That's how Delta Green works.
Right, and so if you get into like an initiative order for Delta Green, each turn takes like not much time at all, and there's not that many of them typically.
Right. Yeah. There are no long fights in Delta Green.
Right. Whereas compare that to one of these downtimes that we've been doing, where, the fights, especially because we're playing at a level above one. One fight, even after I do some surgery on it, it takes like an hour to listen to. Which gets pretty dry, I think, if you're not a member of the fight. If you're fighting in it, it's exciting to some degree. If you're listening to it, at some point you're checking your watch. You're like, all right, when does this thing end? And then you see that you've still got 2.5 hours left in the session and start crying.
There's only so many times somebody can get like hit in the chest with a unicorn horn before they're like, I'm over it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, don't worry. That's these next 2 sessions. Yeah, that was definitely, just to talk briefly about the unpublished at this point downtimes. I have been picking like just awful enemies to fight, and one of the things is that in D&D Beyond, you can create a custom monster, and you can just use a currently existing monster as a starting point, and it'll it's got their entire sheet, and then you can edit it. Unfortunately, it's only got it for like a very small percentage of the monsters that you can use as a reference. So if it's not in there, but you don't want to take all the time to rebuild this thing, because it's very time consuming, then you're kind of like, how do I really want to play this? And you've got to really figure out how much time you want to devote to it, which it's an annoying challenge. But what has ended up happening is that I end up with these like monsters that you fight that just kind of end up doing the same thing over and over again, because I realized looking at the sheet that I'm using that it's like, this thing can really only do one kind of attack, and so there's not a lot of variety here. So I need to be a little more careful when I'm making these downtimes or something, that the enemies you're fighting are a little more interesting, because I'm definitely falling down on that. I don't find them interesting anyway, so I can't imagine you guys do after about 5 minutes of fighting them.
I mean,
but that'll be more clear once you listen to the downtimes.
I say, don't beat yourself up too much. I mean, how many times did Duncan decide to do an Eldritch Blast?
Hey, that's the whole thing. I mean, you can't get mad at a warlock for using Eldritch Blast.
Right.
It's like the whole point.
The best spell in the game.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to put all that time into optimizing out a game, my Eldritch Blast,
then you better
get all
be
my
optimal.
feats lined up.
Yeah.
You're just lucky I didn't pick the ones that both push and pull.
That was the most
is there
devastating
a pull
moment.
one for Eldritch Blast?
There
Yeah.
is.
Isn't that Grasp of
Hadar.
Hadar? Is it?
Okay.
Yeah.
I was the thing that killed me, because I was like, man, if I, have that invocation, once I get to the point where I can do 3 or 4 of these things in a turn, people can just never get near me. And I didn't realize you can only use it once per turn.
So it doesn't say that. It says once, or like when you hit someone with Eldritch Blast. So I actually looked that up yesterday.
That's for Repelling Blast.
Oh, yeah, for
There-
Repelling
there-
Blast. Yeah, you can use it as many times as you hit somebody.
Right. My point is, or I think the point Jack and I are making, are there are some other Eldritch Blast modifiers that I think are only applicable to one of the beams.
Or once per turn or
'Cause,
whatever.
yeah, like I think one of them is you pull them towards you. One of them you maybe slow them down. Like there's some kind of, immobilizing component that maybe gives melee fighters advantage against them, stuff like that. That's not, it doesn't get applied to every beam.
Right. Well, and that's something that, I'd have to... I'm not an expert on all the Eldritch invocations for Eldritch Blast and Warlocks, but that would be something that you should have to declare before you shoot. If you can only do it one beam on your turn, then, before you know whether it hits or misses, you should have to say, before the beam leaves you, whether it's one of those. There are only a couple things in D&D that let you make that decision post facto, like Divine Smite, for example. But anyway, that's in the weeds. Is there anything else that people want to hit?
I do have a homework assignment for everybody.
Oh boy.
Oh god. Okay.
Last Delta Green session, Golden River Underground, I should say. It was revealed, shocking reveal, that most employees of Corvidian Tech are in therapy for the horrible things that happen at the company.
Right.
But we didn't really discuss what was being done. So I'd like everybody to come up with something that might cause everybody to be so traumatized.
Oh, like as a defense contractor, what are they?
Like
Okay.
as the thing that I was considering earlier was maybe like a nerve agent that's only lethal to children.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, that's what Duncan said. He said, "What are they testing nerve gas here?" Yeah. That was his specific.
It only kills children and puppies.
Yeah.
So come up with something horrendous, and then that'll become canon.
Well, so
good.
we've assumed up until this point that Corvidian Tech is they're like a defense manufacturer. Like they're making bombs or something like that. But maybe they're maybe they're like a PMC.
Oh yeah.
Maybe it's like Blackwater.
War has changed.
And
Yeah.
so they're actively, individually involved in like some fucked up stuff.
ID tag weapons. Yeah. Yeah. This is the start of Metal Gear Solid 4 for sure.
But yeah, I'll accept that homework assignment.
I'm on it.